my life began. The day that I died twice. That was a tough day. It was February 27th, 1979. There's a couple of things I never want any of you all to hear. The first one is you have 2 minutes to live. You see, it was a semifinal basketball game. It was Brentwood High School versus Ward Melville High School. We were playing Sachem. And it was an amazing event. It was amazing. It was built, the grandstands were full of those old wooden bleachers you pull out. And the game was over, and I'm walking off the court. We had lost. It was a great game. You know, it was like David versus Goliath. We were just so grateful to be close. And I'm talking to some friends and looking over their shoulders. We're walking down this long, skinny hall off the floor, and I'm looking over, and it was one of those old wood doors. Hinges on the right that swing in, but it had plate glass window in it. And I'm walking through the door looking over my shoulder, as kids do, and I'm talking to my friends, and I went, whoop! I fell through. And it was like a guillotine. And I had to lift it out, and I flipped it over, and it was like a fire hose. I started blowing out ceiling tiles. And I grabbed the thing, and all I felt was bone. It was wide open. I took off running. I'm like, because I took health. So I took off. And I said, I'm cut, give me a tourniquet. Because I knew I needed at least 1 or 2 of those. And so my coaches, fortuitously, Coach Sacco and Coach Sabatelli, they came running off the sidelines. People were screaming and yelling everywhere. Is there a doctor? Is there a nurse in the house? Somebody dial 911, get back to me. And I'm like, I need a tourniquet. They threw the towel around my arm. I sat there, I laid down, and I squeezed that thing as tight, and it was still gushing, but it slowed down. I'll tell you all this. There's not much more in this life more humbling than sitting in a warm puddle of your own blood. The reality of that moment was magnified by my sweet little 5-year-old brother Raymond, who after every basketball game would come running through the legs and off the bleachers and through the crowd and hand me a bag of fruit. As I'm laying there, he found a way to weasel away from Bob, my stepdad, and came up close to that big puddle, holding out a bag of fruit to me. I'm there and I'm still giving directions to the guys, keep squeezing the towels. And I looked at him and I said, honey, I'll get it from you later. And he said, okay. He turned around and walked away. In that moment, there was a lot going on in my head. You see, because 6 quarts of blood is about the most that we have. And that's about 2.5 gallons. So the ambulance came. It was unbelievable how fast the ambulance came. And those guys pulled up. I should have known I was going to be a coach then. Because what happened was those guys, when they came up, I'm like looking at them, holding my arm in that puddle of blood, and I'm looking back at the guys, and they were like, she's going into shock, and I'm like, no, I'm not. You guys better use your legs because you're going to hurt your back. I weigh 200 pounds. All right, well, they put a blood pressure cuff, which was like a bicycle tire, and they blow it up, so it's this huge, and you're like, wow, that's painful. It was painful anyway, as you can quite imagine. And the next thing I know is like, all the ambulance, everything is like, there's sirens going. It's like screaming. We're like ripping away from Matthew Memorial High School, headed over to Ward Melville High School, racing to Matthew Memorial Hospital. One of the wealthiest, most unbelievably beautiful hospitals in all of Long Island. Next thing I know is we are like ripping down the road, and all you hear is ding, 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 ding. I'm like, the guy in the back is like, run it! She's not gonna make it. Just run it. So the driver was like, well, we hit that thing like a freaking ski mogul. We flew over that thing and we landed. There were bottles and tubes and things were flying everywhere. It was insane. And I'm in the back and I'm like, I'm conscious. I could see and I could hear, and the guy's screaming. He just said, keep going, go fast. Come to find out later, Bob, my stepdad, was driving this old Dodge van. Little Raymond wasn't even tied down. That was before kids had to wear seatbelts and car seats. And Peaches, my mom, because, you know, she was a Southern debutante, so she renamed herself because nobody could state her name in New York. And so I found out later, were almost taken out by the train. We got there, code red, code red! Everything was yelling. All I heard were keys jangling, feet running, and squeaky wheels. I'm on a gurney. I'm being thrown down the hall. Next thing I know is I'm like laying there. They lifted me onto this slab. I think they kept it in the freezer. It was so cold. I just remember it being so cold. And I'm laying there, and this nurse, like Nurse Hatchet, comes in, and she goes with scissors. She takes cutting off my underwear, cutting off my. I'm like, whoa, hey, what are you doing? And she goes, I have to cut the clothes off to get it around the tubes, because now I have tubes coming out of every orifice. And she's like, well, we have to take the tube. I said, you can't do that. My coach is going to kill you. Because Brentwood High School, we were one of the poorer school districts. I think those uniforms were at least 15 years old. And the reality of it, I think every basketball team after that was grateful that I actually got them all new uniforms, because they had to cut that right off of me. Yeah, I was there, and I'm laying there, and the doctor walks in, very formal. Dr. Kurtz. I'll never forget his voice. I never saw his face, because I was at this point on the table, and there were tubes everywhere. And I'm laying there, and I'm listening, and Peaches and Bob came in the room, and he's explaining to him, well, the percentages of us, and because this is fully detached, and all of this is up here, and there's only a tricep tendon attached, and the glass went into the bone, and the artery was cut, and obviously we don't know the damage to the medial nerve. We don't know if the arm will ever work again. Peaches stepped into that doctor, buckle to buckle. She stood in there, and she looked at that doctor and smiled in her kind southern voice and said, now, doctor, you look like a very smart and brilliant man. Now, I'm going to have to ask you to sew it on before you cut it off. Peaches. So to this day, I'm so grateful to her for fighting for me in that second. Next thing I know, there's all sorts of things happening, and I'm there in this moment. I'm thinking of my dad, who told me there's going to be tough days. And on those tough days, you got to remember this. And my dad taught me many things. He was a brilliant man. He was a naval pilot. And he left when I was 8. And so, you know, the military doesn't hire schleps. You know, I mean, if they're entrusting you with multi-million-dollar pieces of equipment, you know that, you know, he was a brilliant guy. We landed in New York because he got hired at TWA and Pan Am. He actually pioneered all of the flight instruction manuals that we still, from what I understand, use today. The reality of it is my dad told me many very critical, important things like, how does cruise control work? Don't try to explain that on a first date. It doesn't work. Don't ask me how. He thought it was really important I should know that, though. And then it was so funny because he goes, well, you have to understand that great airplanes fly because there are these 4 immutable laws that you need to memorize. Lift and thrust, weights and drags. Lift and thrust, weights and drags. And I'm like, okay. He goes, because great lives are just like flying. It demands lift and thrust and weights and drags to allow an airplane to fly. And those same immutable laws govern our life. In that moment, I remembered that. Because I started feeling like I was flying. I was like out of body now, and sort of looking down at myself, with everybody like 6 busy bees running around. And I was on a slab, and I just saw myself there, and these people are all yelling at me, breathe! Breathe! In that moment, all I could think of was the sermon from the week before. You know, because it says that if you have the faith of a mustard seed, and I'm like, well, faith is sort of like something you can't see. So this is in my child's mind, I'm thinking. And if you have the faith of a mustard seed, you can move a mountain. So now I'm rationalizing, saying, now if I had the skin or the outer portion of a little mustard seed, and I know they grow into big trees, but I know my arm isn't as big as a mountain. So my thought was, well then, okay, great hands someplace. How am I going to go back to camp and canoe like with one arm? And how am I going to play my guitar with one arm? And I started going through all these scenarios in my head trying to figure out how I could actually do this and get the fruit that I promised to grab from little Raymond. I thought of my family. Some of the most important things in those minutes that we don't think of until we're in those minutes. Next thing I know, I'm there and I said a prayer and I just said, God, help me breathe. I literally felt 2 hands come under my ribs and like this and went, oh! Air surged in, everything went black. I woke up. I don't know how long it was. I woke up, and the next thing I know is there's a TV in my room. I'm so excited because we didn't grow up with TVs. You know, like, we're pretty conservative. And so there's this little boop, 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 boop. It wasn't a TV, it was an EKG thing. I didn't know the difference. I just knew if I breathed, it went boop. I could affect it. They must have had me on some good drugs. So all I know is I'm there and I'm doing the thing and I'm holding my breath because I realized if I could hold my breath, I could control the thing. And all I know is I kept hearing nurses running down and code red. And I go, oh! They're like, stop holding your breath. And I'm like, why? And they're like, you can't do that. And I'm like, okay. And then I did it again. I wasn't the best patient. In that moment, it was so funny because I couldn't see. My head felt like it was so heavy. I couldn't lift anything except my good arm. So I flipped it to the sheet, like the old yellow pages. You young kids won't know what that is. There was a hand in the yellow pages to let your fingers do the walking. So I grabbed some sheet and I'd pull. I grabbed some sheet and I'd pull. And I got over here and I figured if I kept pulling and it dropped off like a cliff, then it was gone. And if I kept walking, I didn't know how far or how much of it they would take off. So every little bit I pulled with the sheet, and then I got to my hand and I could feel fingers. If you would have told me that day, it would take me 7 years of hard work every day, and that would come back, I would have probably quit that day. But we're never given more than we can handle, are we? Next thing I know, I am shifted off to pediatrics because they were so pissed at me for holding my breath. So they moved me to pediatrics, and they gave me like the dancing, singing nurse, because you see Rod Stewart was like top on the charts at that time, and all this nurse kept doing was come walking in my room. If you want my body and you think I'm sexy, come on baby, let me know. I'm like, whoa, what meds are you? All right. I mean, who's going to say no to the meds from somebody singing to you like that? I'm like, okay, but whatever she's selling, I'll take it. So it was really funny. And so by the second or third day, I realized that my arm was about the size of most of your thighs. Well, maybe not all, but it was so big. And it was about 3 to 4 times the size it is, about the size of my thigh. It was very swollen because they had basically did microsurgeries. They were controversial surgical clamps they used that had never been used to hold an artery. And they said, well, if you get hit, it may go burst again. I'm like, no, oh my goodness. So the next thing I know is the nurse comes in. She goes, well, we need to get him start moving around. And I told her at one point, I said, I feel broken. I feel broken. And she looked at me and she goes, are your lips broken? I said, no, ma'am. She goes, hot legs, they made me out. So she made me flip my legs over, and every time I flip my legs out, because I have, okay legs, and anyway, it was very funny. So she put those little slippers on, and I grabbed my squeaky wheelie bobby thing, and I shuffled down to every hall. That day, I died twice. But you know what? I found my mission and my passion for the rest of my life. Every room I walked in, there were children who were in pain. And they'd look at me like, why are you here? Because I was singing, and now I'm singing hot legs and walking into everybody's rooms. and telling jokes, and some kicked me out, and even some, it was horrible for my self-esteem, but I'd show them my arm when I showed them why I was in there, and it looked like a Frankenstein arm, and it was so big, and it was huge, and some of them would just throw up, and I'm like, oh, okay, I learned I better hide that. That's a little scary reaction from folks. I went on with this reattached arm and was blessed in so many ways. I became the head strength and conditioning specialist at Hofstra University, pioneered 18 of their programs, worked at Adelphi University, went on, and even Dr. Harry Snyder's wife Sarah is here with me tonight. They met me in 1980 and gave me my first stint as an Olympic coach for the 84 Olympics. I love it. Okay, whew, I was going to try not to do that. Okay. Okay, I figured out. The New York Jets was so funny. I got both my parents on a phone. There were several. I said, I don't know why you named a 21-inch long person Bertha, but I'm going to just go by B. Lee Brandon, so now y'all don't have to stop wondering what my first name was. But the New York Jets were in, could you imagine being 21 inches long and then 200 pounds at the age of 14 and then being named Bertha? So I handed in my resume and I told both my parents, I said, I love you dearly, but maybe when I turn 90 I'll add the Eartha back in, but not 40. Best decision I ever made. A rather non-gendered name. It's been really amazing. It opened that door because that was when resumes were just paper, you see. And that was when your face wasn't even on a resume. It was 1989. I walked in, Coach Greg McCready for the New York Jets. They were on the Hofstra campus. Coach looked at me and he says, well, what are you here for? And I said, I'm here for the job. I said, you called me in. He goes, who are you? And I said, Lee Brandon. And he goes, oh, well, you're right here on the top. Oh, this is very impressive. He goes, but is this a joke? And I'm like, I looked over my shoulder. I'm like, is he talking to me? Who is he talking to? And I'm like, no. He goes, well, we have strength requirements here. And I'm like, show me the bar. Show me the bar. So we had to only deadlift 315. By that time, I was up to deadlifting about 315. All the guys did it once. I did it 3 times. Pop, mic drop. I got jobs. You never know about it because to date, 35 years later, the New York Jets still, because I didn't show up on an HR form, because back then you got hired on a handshake. All right? Isn't it something like Hidden Figures, that movie by Kevin Costner? The reality of our lives sometimes, there are jobs that we all do. Moms, delivery workers, factory workers, servers. The reality of it is that we all have we all are invaluable, but we're often invisible. But none of us should ever be dismissed. So I pray one day, and pray with me, that the New York Jets get to celebrate that, because I think they'll win another Super Bowl once they fall on the right side of their karma. All right, next thing that was really fun, I didn't even tell you, is that I picked up a golf club in my 40s on a dare, which was a hysterical story. Save that for another day. And I was like, wow, that was easy. And I'm like, oh, that was exciting. So I went on and won 3 international world long drive titles, beating women a third my age, kicking butt, taking names. I said, if I can run and hit a field hockey ball at full speed, there's no way I'm going to miss an adult T-ball sitting still. Next thing I know, I'm bending golf clubs because Sports Illustrated called me and they were like, we want to do a photo shoot with you. And I'm like, hell yeah. Power, glamour. So I'm bending the golf clubs and wearing a swimsuit. I think I was 42. I'm like, yes, that was a fun day. I've had a very blessed career. 45 years I've done what I do. And I'll tell you this, I wouldn't change a day of it. 22 years of that, I was a professional athlete. The reality, for me, is the reason I'm here tonight, mostly, is because I was told the second thing that I never want any of you to hear. I was like, I went into a doctor's office, they had done all these things, and I was having some issues breathing. I never smoked a day in my life. And I walked into the doctor's office, and I sat down with her, top infectious disease person, and if you know anything about the crypt, or it's a long name, it's like cryptococcal, cockamamie, floctaflutal in your lung of doodles. Yeah. So it's, so basically I contracted a terminal lung disease. So I sat in that doctor's office. I'm like, all right, tell me what's going on. She goes, well, you need to get your affairs together because you have 3 to 6 months to live. I'm here tonight celebrating with all of you because that was a year and 3 weeks ago.
Wow.
Not only was it a year and 3 weeks ago, but she says, you are 1 in 5 million plus, and you're going to be written up in every medical journal because we're going to study you. And I'm like, I did not want to be a first at that. I'm here to share with you all tonight. Not only do I believe in miracles, but I leaned in to that doctor and I said, Doc, you see that? You see that trophy? You see that reattached thing? I said, what do I got to do? She goes, well, if you survive the meds and you possibly are going to lose most, if not all, your hair. Best case scenario, 3 to 6 months. When I outlived that, the reality of it for me was that, well, then they don't know me. And I leaned into her and I channeled my best peaches. And I channeled my mom and I said, now, Doc, you're a very smart person and you're very talented, I know it, but you don't know my heart. And you don't know that I believe in miracles. And I'm here for a reason, so tell me what I got to do. So I quit drinking, I didn't smoke, so I don't have many vices. I like coffee in the morning. But the reality of it was that she goes, don't change anything, because that was at my 6-month checkup, and she was like, what's going on, and how is that possible? Because all the nodules were gone. Oh, real. Yeah. So she said, just doesn't happen. So I go back to my dad with the lift and thrust and weights and drags. Because you see, there's 2 kinds of people in the world, givers and takers. Lift and thrust is the love, the gentleness, the meekness, the temperance, the humility, the service, the way we help each other, the way we embrace each other. And the weights and the drags that are always going to be there. They will always be there. Turbulence is always there, but it does not last long. It doesn't last long. We need to have that hope and that faith. Know that with a little skin, it doesn't take much faith. Look at me, I'm living proof if I can do what you all can, and there's nothing more inevitable in this life than change. And the hard times come with this. So I ask you all, if you were told today you have 2 minutes to live, who would you call? What would you do? Do it today. If I told you you had 3 to 6 months to live, what would you do differently? Freaking go to Tahiti. Do it today. Live bigger. Live lifting and thrusting. Because if it weren't for the lift and the thrust, the airplanes couldn't fly. If it weren't for the weights and drags, the airplanes couldn't fly. It demands the pull down. It demands the hate, the gossip, the betrayals that we have to overcome and lift ourselves above in order to be able to lift ourselves up to go to the next level. So my challenge to all of you is to inspire you, but say, let's soar, let's fly, let's go to the next level. Put your arms up with me. Let's fly.